Got a scene that's got a bit of some trees and some water and some nice reflections today, so we're going to have a go with a bit of watercolour, a little bit of acrylic ink and a bit of gum arabic, so I'll show you how to steady those still reflections. Okay, so I've drawn this out. Got the line of the land here, these rocks here, a rough idea of where the foliage is coming and the distant trees, the trunks, don't worry about the branches, a few rocks in the water and a bit of an idea of where the reflections are. Colours wise, I've got cobalt blue and light red to make a grey. If you haven't got light red, you can use burnt sienna. That would be cobalt blue and burnt sienna to make a grey. I've got a dark green made with gamboge and ultramarine, and then I've got some raw sienna on its own. I've then got my acrylic ink ready in sepia to come on to do some of the trees. Okay, so I'm going to pop some water in the background. I'm coming over the tree trunks. I'm going to come right to the water's edge here, so I'm going to pop some on the rocks. So doing this whole back section. Take your time, make sure you've got plenty of water on. The water's going to give you the time to go through everything. It's a really cloudy, overcast day again, so I apologise if it looks a bit dull. We don't seem to be having much summer this year. So I'm coming in first of all with some cobalt blue. And I'm just creating this bit of sky behind. So circular motion using my round number 10. Just coming in over the trees, just creating this wispy cloud effect. I'm going to come in with a little bit of the grey next. So first of all, I'm just going to come in between these trees where I can see the distant foliage. Just start to create some shapes of possible trees in the background. So this is still with my round number 10. I just don't want to eliminate all of the green area, so I'm being a bit careful as to where I'm going with it. It's more of a considered approach. You can come down into this section of the rocks. So with a bit of a rigger or line writer, I'm just going to start to create some lighter branches. So I'm just coming up with the grey. It's still wet, so it's still going to soften in. really nicely. It's all about building up these layers. Okay, I'm going to come in with some of the darker green now. So we can sponge a little bit in later. This is about just getting a bit of a background colour in. So don't feel you have to go everywhere where it's green, because we can have some lighter bits in later as well. What's really nice is when you use the ultramarine is it granulates and gives a really nice texture. I can already see that happening. Just come in and create. Some of these lighter bits. And then make sure you give your ink a really good shake up. And you can just come in with a pipette. And you just want to start to get, so go with the thicker bits first. Sort of drawing with the pipette. If you squeeze a little bit, some ink comes out. You can do this with a brush as well. If you're thinking, oh my god, what's she doing? Then do it with a brush. I just really like the effect. I'm going to do a bit with the brush as well. You come into some of these dark rocks as well. You can add a little bit more later. These darker areas. I'll get a number 6 brush. I can just paint in any more lines that I want. Try and get as much of this base on as you can this time, because the softness really helps. We're going to do a little bit with onto dry later, but not too much. And the beauty of the ink is it just all splits out and creates lovely effects. And these little bits of dark here are what's going to make the picture. Okay, I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so that's nice and dry now. I've turned upside down because I just find it easier to paint downwards when I'm doing these branches. So this is my number 6 and I'm using the grey mix to start with, and I'm just starting to define a little bit more. So we've got a lovely soft edges, and what we want to make sure now is we don't lose those soft edges. So we're just going to build up bit by bit. So the first thing I'm doing is putting in some lighter branches with the grey, and every little bit that we're doing now is going to add depth. So you can use whichever brush you want to use. I'm using my number 6 because I've got quite a good point on it. But if you wanted to use a line writer or a rigger, you could do. I'm just coming along, so I always rest on my little finger. I can still see those very faint ones that I've popped on in the grey in the wet and wet wash, so I don't want to go over all of that. I'm just building up additional layers. You don't have to be too precise. Sponging does help because where I'm cutting off here, we're going to sponge up to, so it's not going to be floating branches. Then I'm going to use a bit of the sepia ink. I do want you to be quite careful about how much of this you use within the picture. You don't want everything to become too solid. So I want you to look for the sharper areas that you want to pull out. So I'm going to pick out a bit of a branch here. You can see as soon as you get it in that it's a lot sharper. You don't want too much of this. I'm just going to soften it in places as well, because some of this is going to go behind some of the foliage that we're going to sponge in. I just get a wet brush. I use the same brush. I'm just going to bring a little bit of water in places. I'm going to bring a bit of water in the bottom here. I don't want that to just be too sharp. And then we've got this big tree trunk here, which definitely needs to be sharpened up, but I'm not going to lose everything from the softness perspective. So I'm making sure that I keep it, in a way you need to go thinner than you actually think the tree trunk is. It works better to do it slightly thinner. So I just added a little bit of water to the mix on that side, just so that it's not too strong. And then this one down here, just going to pop in a couple of stronger branches there. And just bring some finer ones off in places. It all adds to that really nice feeling of depth. If you wanted to get a drawing pen out, you could at this stage as well, if you wanted to do really fine ones. And that's an option as well. I'm going to swap round again now. And just pop in these darker rocks. So I'm going to do that with the sepia as well. There's sort of rocks and branches along this bottom bit, but this is what's going to give us something to reflect, so need to make sure we've got these in. So if you want to add an odd dab of water in places, you can do, just to make a bit of an area lighter. You can lift a little bit of the ink out if you want to, just with a damp brush. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so that's nice and dry now. I've got a nice natural sponge, lots of bobbly bits. I've wet it, I've wrung it out really well, dabbed it off with some kitchen towel, and I'm going to come into some of the green paint that we've got. And I'm coming in and I'm dabbing. So I'm going to create this effect of foliage. So I'm dabbing, I'm moving, so that every little bit is different. So twisting in between. And this is building up this foliage. just keep adding a bit more paint. You don't want to run too short of paint. If you wanted to stipple, you could have a go at stippling as well. This works quite nicely. If it needs to be denser, you just keep coming over. Some bits are a bit denser than others. Should really help give a nice sense of light shining through now with this. So just keep coming over the bits where it needs to be a bit denser. Got a really nice subtle background there now. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so we're coming into this section now. It's where it's coming down to the water's edge. I'm just going to get base colour on this. So the first colour that I'm coming on with is some raw sienna. And I'm dabbing into a tiny touch of light red. If you've used burnt sienna, this is where you dab into a tiny touch of burnt sienna. Just so we've got that continuity there through the picture. Then into the grey. And there's quite a lot of grey in this, and I want you to try and break the water's edge a little bit so that it's not too straight a line, if that makes sense. So make sure you break it a little bit. And then bring that grey in. You've got some real clear patches of light which we can pop on with shadow later. Just get the colour in for now. And I'm just dipping into a little bit more of the sepia ink and just getting it at this bottom section here. So it's nice and dark here. We'll get that in. And I'm going to take a little bit in just here as well. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. And I want you to come and paint the base on the rocks. So I've not followed the exact shape and I've not done every rock in here like a stepping stone, but I do want a little bit of colour on them. So this is just a bit of raw sienna going on dry. And then I've got a bit of the grey. So I'm just starting to get the base of them. the shadow. I don't want it to be all hard, so this is just letting it soften in places. If any of them look a little bit warm, or you want them to look a little bit warm, you can add a tiny bit of the light red as well. Don't be too harsh. And then I've got another rock just down here, which is a warmer one. Which has got a fair amount of light red in. A little bit of the grey in. It'll appear like they're floating a bit at the moment, but we'll sort that out later. Just getting that base in. Then I'm going to come in with a bit of the sepia ink. Again, because I'd quite like it to be a bit softer. So it's still a bit damp. The beauty of rocks, or in some cases this is stepping stones, it's you can get away with a little watermark here and there. So the dark ink is creating the shadow. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so this is nice and dry now. So I've got a little bit of the grey, and it's not too strong. I've watered it down quite a lot, and I'm coming on now to start to create the sort of dappled light. Got those shadows there now, and if I can do a little bit of, so there's my brush on the flat, I can do a little bit of dry brushing towards the front. So this is round number 10, loaded with paint, and I'm holding it like that, so I'm catching the surface of the paper, creating that sort of dried brush texture effect. Okay, I'll dry that one off. Okay, so I've wet the water, I've come around the rocks, and I've tipped about a teaspoon of gum arabic and spread that around as well. If you haven't got gum arabic, it doesn't matter, you can manage without it, you've just got to work a little bit quicker. So the gum arabic slows the flow of the paint, so it just means you can work a bit wetter and it won't affect your reflections. So this is a little bit of raw sienna that I'm taking in first of all, just where I've got the shallower, yellower areas. So we start with the lightest colour, then I'm going to touch into a little bit of the light red. You want some blue in here next, so some cobalt blue, so that you're starting to reflect the colours from the sky as well. And you want to leave a fair amount of white, you want that light in here as well. So just help yourself come round the rocks with your smaller brush at the same time. This back section, a little bit of the blue in. paint around these stepping stones a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to come in with the grey. So I'm using my round number 10, but you can use whichever brush you're comfortable with. I am going to drop down to a small flat in a minute to do some ripples. A lot of this looks quite grey in the background. Then have some of the sepia in as well. Try and keep that bit of light at the back. Can come through and start to create a few ripples. Dab into some sepia. Be quite brave. The sepia. It's coming this way. Dab a bit off on the brush if you need to. On the kitchen towel. You need that dark reflection in there, and you need the dark down here as well. Okay, so this is all dry now. Let me just explain the last couple of bits I did that you missed because the card ran out. So I carried on just getting this little bit of a reflection of the rocks with the ink, and then I swept through a few grey soft ripples. So just carried on with my round number 10 and just swept a few of those in. The other thing I've done, which you can't see now, is I popped a bit of masking fluid on here to create these light roots. So I'm going to come over that bit in a minute. So I'm just going to wet this. That masking fluid's dried. Be nice and careful here. And then just take a bit of grey in. It's probably the easiest way to do this without negative painting, which is to paint the background to bring out the foreground. And then I'm going to dip into a bit of the ink. Just dot that in places. So I'm just bringing it around some of these rooty bits just to emphasise them a little bit more. You hopefully should see where I've painted the masking fluid now. We're going to let that dry, and then when we take it off you'll have those roots appearing. So I went a bit further than I needed to go to make sure that I get a nice soft edge happening there. Okay, I've got a flat. It's a small flat. I'm popping a bit of water into my grey mix, and I'm going to add a few ripples to the surface now. So this is where you can add a little bit more definition. So to watch carefully what I'm doing, I keep the brush quite horizontal, but then I'm moving it downwards, and this creates this nice reflection ripple effect. And you can do as much or as little of this as you want. Definitely where you've got these harder ripples it works quite nicely. Just make sure that the mix isn't too strong. And it also gives like the water a surface. And any little bits in the background. What you do need to be a little bit careful of is how much you agitate the surface when you've got the gum arabic on, because it will start to lift quite easily. So just be nice and gentle. You should be able to get some really nice shadows and ripples. Concentrate on round where your rocks are to make sure that they're not floating. If they've got some grey around them, they feel like they're part of the surface. And sweep through. You can vary the pressure of the brush. So you're just really looking at where the lines and ripples are and popping them in. Just making sure you don't eliminate all of the white. And then I am just going to come into a little bit of the sepia. So I want to make a little bit more of this reflection. So this is the sepia ink. I'm just bringing this in nicely. It's not quite a flat reflection, so I'm going to just pop a few little broken bits in with around number 6 as well, so it's not too precise. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I've dried that now, and all I need to do, the last bit, is to just rub this bit of masking fluid off. Hopefully it's not too light, and it's just going to add that sort of rooty texture that's on the photograph. Okay, so that's all done now. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you next week.